Welcome to the Purina Ambassador Series. Today I'm here with Greg Grimes. Greg owns Aquatic Environmental Services out of Georgia. And Greg, thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, looking forward to this.
Greg, take a couple minutes to tell everybody watching here today kind of what you and your team does in relation to growing big bass and things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. We started back in 2000 as a full-time company and traveled throughout mostly the Southeast. I actually helped design the lake that we're on here way back in 2015. But yeah, our specialty is growing some giant bass, and part of that program is stocking fish and aeration, lake design from the beginning stages, and of course supplemental feeding is a big part of that. So,
sure.
We really enjoy what we do. That's our passion, and growing some big bass is a lot of fun.
Great. Well, hopefully everybody watching today is going to learn a few things in regards to growing big bass. And Greg, right now, I mean, we got the cool weather here upon us today, and we're getting into that time of year. And what, in regards to cooler weather, the fall-winter period coming up, what do we need to be thinking about in regards to growing bass during that period of time?
The big change that we make, Scott, is actually tied in with the fish food. Is we will start adjusting the fish feeders.
Okay.
So we've been turning the feeders in the hot summer months, turn it to early in the morning, late in the evening, at the cooler times of the day. The fall is probably the best feeding time throughout the entire year. It's a small window. So once you get into that really cold snaps where it's 30s and only gets up to 50, you're gonna have to scale the feeders back. But in the fall, to maximize that potential to grow your bluegill, which is the base of the food chain, we're gonna adjust those feeders to 3-4 times a day, throughout the day, and not so much early in the morning and late in the evening, but maybe hit those middle of the day things. So we're in a transition period to just be thinking about that. Sometimes people ask this question, should we turn our feeders off now? No, you're missing a huge opportunity. So adjust the feeders to maximize the growth rate that you're going to get on the bluegill, which will then transition into bass growth.
Okay. Well, in regards to that topic right there, is there anything that we need to be thinking about in regards to the specific feeds, during that time period, in regards to what your goal is for that specific property?
Yeah, I mean, again, you can feed several different species of fish. So just on the bluegill, you'll want to be targeting, if it's a newer pond, we like the 500 product because it's a smaller pellet. But then once the pond is established, we really switch over to MVP, and we've got some here. It's got the multiple pellet sizes in there. So you're feeding the little 3-inch fish, you're feeding the 4- and 5-inch fish, then you're even feeding the giant bluegill as well. If your goal is for hybrid striped bass or feed trained largemouth, that feed directly off the feed, you'll want to transition to a 600 feed. And the setup here, maybe one feeder here on the dock have 600 because you're trying to target the trophy size fish. And then back in the back, we know there's more spawning, have the 500 of the MVP. So you're trying to always match exactly what that fish is needing. And then we have the largemouth bass pellets, which a couple of feeders out there might throw those, but most of the time our clients are just feeding that by hand. So obviously that's a little more labor intensive. Most people really enjoy it. Yeah, thanks for showing that. I mean, this is a big nugget. So, but feeding by hand directly to the largemouth, especially once you get a pound or so, that's a lot more energy per strike than some of these smaller pellets. So just the different size products are there. There's even a starter feed when you start a brand new pond up. And I didn't even think about this, but we are just now stocking ponds. So the lakes that have been prepped, it's been too hot to move fish, so we're starting to stock ponds now. So we'll start off with a starter feed, at least a bag or two, to jumpstart the growth of those fish.
Gotcha. You said something interesting right there, starting to stock. In the fall period, I always think about trout, for example. We start stocking trout in the fall and things like that. Is there any considerations you need to put into your program on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, and on the trout, you're right. We will be moving those soon. There's really two goals for us on trout. One is a client that wants to stock trout so they can catch them. And so we're stocking larger trout, 10 inches and bigger. And so a trout's a predator. A trout has a hinge jaw, has a bigger mouth. So we're gonna go directly into 600. For clients wanting to grow some monster bass, there is not a better, fish food's awesome, but you cannot replace, the meal of a trout. And that's what some of this is mimicking, actually. So we're going to be feeding these smaller trout, but we still want to grow those guys too. And I tell my clients all the time, it's a whole lot cheaper to feed those trout and grow some of those out. So we're going to stock some little bitty trout. So some of those will get eaten right away. some of them will get adjusted, and then we're going to start the program. So yeah, if you're stocking your fingerling trout, maybe go to a 500 or an MVP. But a lot of our trout are seasonal. We're going to put them in now. They're going to die in the summer. So we want to maximize that growth period. So we'll stock them in there, and it is amazing. I mean, it really is. We'll go from a pound trout, 3/4 pound trout, to 3 or 4 pound trout before they die in June by feeding the correct food.
How many trout do you put in a pond? What's your kind of rule of thumb on that kind of deal? Is there anything out there that people watching today can pick up some tips from? Or
as a biologist, I always love to give a number like that, but I tell people most of the time, again, because it's seasonal, it's a budget thing.
Okay.
How much money do you want to leave in for the trout? I call it a fairly cheap entertainment. You know, everything's relative to the dollars you have, but if you can put in $400 or $500 worth of fish and enjoy the heck out of those things throughout those months, it's well worth it. So somewhere, to give you a number though, you know, 50 to 100 per acre. Again, we usually are putting those on a smaller body of water, so trying to catch them out. Okay. But you can go up to 300 or 400 because you're going into the winter time, cooler temperatures, you can sustain a lot higher pounds of fish.
Yeah, in regards to, like you said right there, just the entertainment factor of catching those trout. I mean, the fall period is, you know, everybody usually thinks about harvesting fish, which is an important part of a lake program or a pond program, but how about like when it comes to harvesting fish in regards to the fall and winter versus the summertime?
That's a really good point, because what happens a lot of times, we'll get clients complaining about some of the catchability of their fish in the hot summer months. The fall, again, just because they're aggressive on the fish food, it's the same kind of deal. They're aggressive in biting too. So a lot of our clients do not harvest enough bass. You know, we're going to be talking about growing some bass. So harvest is a huge part of that. So get out there now. Going into the winter months, it's a great time to be pulling out some of those smaller bass. You know, again, not going into too much detail, but target the fish are most common, is the way I say it. So we run a relative weight index and get kind of complicated, but if he's long and skinny, pull it out. If he's short and fat, possibly put it back. But no, good point. Great time to be pulling those out, because then you're going into the winter time. Then you go into I would say the spring, when everything's starting to gear back up. It's great to have a lower density of bass competing at that point.
That's a good point. That's a good point. You know, we were talking about a second ago in the very beginning of this conversation, you know, time on those feeder times and things like that. Is there anything that a person would do in regards to the number of feeders on a lake or property during the fall and winter? Would you still have that same number of feeders going, but just different time settings? Or do you do things like, you know, less feeders going or more? You know, is there anything like that a person needs to think about?
That's a good point. We probably should emphasize that a little more. Typically, if we're just feeding bluegill though, we'll keep the same feeders going. Okay. We'll just turn them down. So to transition in, folks want to, you know, get a little more information than just the fall. We crank them up in the fall, but once it does get cold, you'll turn it to say 3 p.m., hottest part of the day. And you'll still get fish feeding, you know, even up here in Missouri, you'll still get fish feeding up until, you know, late December, early January, until it gets really cold if you feed it that hottest part of the day. Now, you brought up a good point though. Maybe what I should do is, if you've got a pond, you know, and typically we will do one feeder in a small pond. They really try to maximize things, one feeder for maybe an acre. We'll do 2 feeders in a 2-acre pond. Once you get 10, 12 acres, you know, we may do 1 feeder per 3 or 4 acres. So if they want to concentrate trout, for instance, turn them all off except that 1 feeder and concentrate them in that general area, so you got a better chance of catching those and pull them out.
That makes sense. Well, you know, like a lot of people here watching today is, you know, everybody normally would think about growing bass or fish and pond management. That's kind of a spring and summer kind of deal. And then a lot of people just switch gears this time of year. But I know there's a lot of people watching today that are really, you know, have a passion for growing big fish. And, you know, is there anything else that these guys might want to think about between now and, let's say, next spring, when people get that back on the brain, start thinking about that again? But are there anything else they could kind of work on with their biologist and or yourself and things like that to kind of be thinking about the spring coming up? I know we're a long ways away, but you know, always staying out in front of it.
Yeah, I mean, again, harvest is a big part of that. Water quality is easy, you know. Going into the winter time. But what we like to do is, if you've been thinking about an aeration system, get that set up over the winter time so that come next spring, all you do is flip a switch. If you set up aeration in the hot summer months when you think you're needing it, there's a break-in period, and we've unfortunately had clients, the aeration did what it's supposed to and mixed the water and they've killed their fish. So set that sucker up in the wintertime. You know, again, working mostly in the southeast, lime and fertilization programs are there. The liming should take place, you know, in the fall going into the winter, because it takes 3 months to go into effect. So if you need a program to increase your nutrients come springtime, think about doing the wintertime lime applications. What else? Oh, and then of course the big part of it is you want to grow bass, and you're pretty limited to when you're stocking fish. So we've got a forage stocking program. We do some stuff in the spring. We'll maybe talk about that later. But right now is a great time to stock forage fish. We're trying to maximize the growth of the bluegill with the fish food, but many times the bluegill numbers are limited. So we stock a lot of bluegill in the fall. Bass's metabolism will slow down come wintertime. So we have really good success if we stock those bluegill now going into the winter, and then come next spring there'll be a lot of reproduction. We can stock golden shiners, and again, like I mentioned, we can start stocking the trout when it comes wintertime, and really that boosts the bass growth initially, but it boosts the bass growth going out of the winter. When they start to die, when it starts to warm up, they'll slow down, the bass will hammer them. So now's the time to set the plate for next spring, really.
That's great info right there. I think everybody watching today will appreciate that knowledge. You know, also kind of wrapping this thing up as we get into the fall period, I know a lot of your clients are also sportsmen and things like that. Is there anything else in regards to that side of your business that this time of year?
I do have a master's in wildlife as well, so we love to play around with some of that. We work with other biologists, but we love these blocks. The
quick draw block.
Yeah, the quick draw block is phenomenal. When it, you know, you put out some other stuff in front of a camera and it's gone right away. The blocks last longer. It's a great nutritional source, you know, for a little bit of time, but we really use it for camera census. To see what's going on with the deer. So most of our clients have lakes, have property they're trying to manage deer on, so we use a lot of these blocks too.
No, they're great for trail camera census and things like that. So no, well, I appreciate you being here this morning, Greg.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
This has been a great little knowledge of, hope everybody gains some knowledge on growing big bass and pond management, lake management, and things like that. So we appreciate you being here with us.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.